So the loanable funds market is the market for borrowing and lending. And so we have a demand for lending, and first of all, we're generally going to use the real interest rate when we're in the loanable funds market. It wouldn't be wrong to use the nominal interest rate. It would just include that inflation component. But ultimately, what people care about in terms of the cost of borrowing or lending is going to be that real interest rate. So that's usually what we're going to use. And so we get this downward sloping demand curve, other things being equal. When that interest rate is lower, the cost of borrowing is lower, and you're going to get more investment. So the demand is, we're going to think of specifically for private investment, borrowing for private investment. So, and remember, investment means physical capital investment. So that's what we're talking about in terms of the demand side for loanable funds. Downward sloping demand curve. This is going to be the supply of savings. So other things being equal, if you get a higher return on your savings. So we're just assuming there is this one interest rate here in this market. In reality, there's lots of different interest rates for different borrowing and lending markets. But to simplify, there's a bunch of savings out there. It's going to get channeled into investment. So other things being equal, when someone gets a higher return on those savings, they're willing to save more. Quantity supplied increases. So that gives us this upward sloping supply of savings. So that's the two sides of this market. And just like any other market, this price is what clears this market. In this case, the price is the real interest rate. So just like in a micro market, the price of some good clears because the price adjusts. In this case, we have a bunch of people with savings. We have a bunch of people who want to borrow for investment, and it's not a coincidence that they end up being equal because the interest rate adjusts until they're equal. So all that investment is going to get financed by savings. Someone has to postpone consumption in order to have that amount of investment, so savings equals investment. Now, national savings is public plus private, and initially we're assuming there's no public here. So public would be the government either running a deficit or running a surplus. If they spend more than they bring in taxes, they're running a deficit, and that's going to be negative public savings or public dissaving. And if they run a surplus, it's going to be, if they bring in more in taxes than they spend, we're going to have a surplus. For now, we're assuming zero public savings. Government is running a balanced budget, so there's only private savings here making up our national savings. So we'll bring back the government in a minute. So that's the two sides of a market here. And then just like any other market, if something is causing one of these two factors to change other than this price, this real interest rate, then it's going to be a shift. So anything that causes people to want to invest more other than a change in the interest rate. So it could be just expectations about the economy, the return on investment in this particular economy, other growth rate or something other than just that interest rate. Tax incentives, anything like that, that's going to cause people at each interest rate to want to borrow and invest more. That's an increase in demand. And then this market is going to clear at this higher interest rate that causes interest rate to go up. And similarly on the supply side, so anything that changes savings behavior other than a change in the interest rate, then, so again, could be demographics, it could be tax incentives, something like that, but people want to save more at any given interest rate. Increase in supply, again, that causes the interest rate to fall. So just like any other graph, as far as the demand side is concerned, something caused the interest rate to fall. That makes investment cheaper. We get more investment. We're just moving along our demand curve to this new equilibrium. Okay, so one other source of savings, if we now open up the economy to the rest of the world, we could have not just domestic savings, but also foreign savings. We'll call that capital inflow. Here we mean financial capital when we use it in this context. So this is kind of jumping ahead in terms of the Mankiw textbook, but we'll see this later on. This is going to be another shift in the supply of loanable funds. So foreigners also can supply their savings, and then that's going to be an increase in the supply of loanable funds available for investment, and again has the same effect here. You could also have foreigners pulling out their savings, and then you would just be doing the opposite. You'd have a capital outflow. And again, we'll see that more later on. So again, we have our savings investment identity, and now it's just total savings, including foreigners, has to equal investment. So just all that domestic investment here we're talking about, and this is all domestic investment, has to get financed through savings. Well, now it could be national savings, public or private. We haven't brought it in public yet, plus foreign savings. That has to equal the total amount of investment. So all of this investment has to get financed through some amount of savings. Okay, so now the government is going to be borrowing, spending more than they bring in taxes. And so first we started with just private savings, which made up national savings. And now when the government starts borrowing, the way we're going to do that is to reduce the amount of public savings. So we have negative public savings. So compared to the total savings that we had before, it's less because we now have this negative public savings. And this original supply curve now is just the private savings, and once we include the public, it's just going to be less than before because we now have this negative public savings. So national savings still positive here, we're assuming, and so it's just less than before because we have this negative public savings. So again, decrease in supply, what that does is just move us along here. That causes the interest rate to rise, and the effect that we get of this, we call this crowding out of investment, because this higher interest rate causes people to invest less, as the government absorbs some of the savings that otherwise would have been available for investment, private investment. And so we get this crowding out. Savings still equals investment, because this is now the new level of national savings here at Q2. And that's now the new level of investment. So savings still equals investment once we account for national savings has to equal private investment if we don't have foreign savings. So again, we're back to a closed economy here, but now the government is borrowing. So that's the way our textbook does it. And so we're just going to follow that, the ManQ textbook. And if we had the opposite, so if the government had positive public savings, it was running a surplus, it would just be the opposite. It would be adding to the private savings to get national savings over here, and we would just be going the other way. Now, other textbooks, and you may see, in a review book, or the rubric will show it both ways. You don't have to do it either way, but I'll just show it to you. So you could put government borrowing on the demand side instead of the supply side, and the result is going to be the same. It's just that in this case, what we're doing is, instead of having this demand curve just be private investment, now if we include the government borrowing, we're just going to add that to total borrowing. So now this becomes private investment plus the public borrowing, and the original demand curve still is just the private investment. And so now we're just keeping the supply side just strictly private savings. And so you're going to get the same result, because now if I want to know what's happening to investment, I'm going to look at this demand curve, because now this caused the interest rate to rise just like before. And now I'd want to look at D1, this demand curve, to see what's happening to investment, because this just isolates the private investment. This now includes that public borrowing for total borrowing. And you still get this crowding out. So, and it's the same as before. So the higher interest rate on this demand curve is showing us that we're investing less. So again, same result, but we don't necessarily have to do it this way, as long as you're consistent. So the ManQ textbook just has government affecting the savings side, but as long as you label what you're doing here, it would make no difference. So you might see this in, like I said, in other textbooks or other review books.